Hello. This week, a bit late, but I'm still recording the last week Torah portion, which is the first portion of the fifth book of Torah, Devarim. Before we start with the actual portion, I would like to talk a little bit about the book itself, the fifth book of Torah, Devarim. Devarim translation is words. It was originally known as Mishneh Torah, and I think last year I was saying exactly the same things at this point in time. But repetition is good for us, so we will remember. The repetition or restatement of the Torah, that's what this book is all about. Hence the Latin name, Deuteronomy, a second statement of the law, which is basically repetition. In it, Moses restates with some additions and some omissions both the history and the set of laws contained in the previous four books. Judaism is a collective faith, the faith of community, people, a nation with Torah in our hearts and our minds. And Judaism is a system for people learning to speak to each other and to Hashem. And there is a deep significance in the shift in this book, Devarim, from the children of Israel to Israel, from a group of individuals with the common ancestry to a nation bound by collective responsibility. God did not choose, nor did he make a covenant with individuals as individuals, with only the righteous or only the holy and pure and innocent and upstanding citizens. No, he made the covenant with the entire people, righteous and maybe not so righteous. And this is what this book is all about. Now, let's look at the first parsha, Devarim, which is the one we learning the last week, because I'm recording it in the evening on Sunday after Shabbat. On the first Shabbat, Moses begins his repetition of the Torah for the next 36 days to the assembled new young generation of Israel, reviewing the events that occurred and the laws that were given in the course of their 40 years journey through the desert, from Egypt to Sinai, and then from Sinai to Promised Land. He rebukes the people for their failings and iniquities and urges them to keep Torah and observe Torah commandments in the land that God is giving them as an eternal heritage, into which they shall cross after his death, after 36 days. So he's on his deathbed, proclaiming, repeating the whole, basically the whole Torah over a period of 36 days to the whole population of Israel. Moses recalls his appointment of judges and magistrates, and then recalls sending the spies and the people's subsequent Lushan Hora regarding the Promised Land, when they listened to the spies, which brought them a negative report, and which resulted in a decree by God that the whole generation of men, which were basically refusing to go into the land of Israel, that they will die in the desert, and only the young generation will cross the Jordan River and will go into the land of Israel. Moses also recounts some more recent events, the refusal of the nations Moab and Ammon to allow them, the Israelites, to pass through their countries, and the wars against the Amorite king Sihon and the king Og, and the settlement of their lands by the tribes Reuben and Gad, and part of the tribe of Manasseh later on, because Moses wanted to have part of the tribe Manasseh being on one side of the river and the other on the other side of the river, so that they will serve as a link of the tribes of Reuben and Gad with the rest of the tribes of Israel. Moshe conveys a message to his successor, Joshua, who will take the people into the promised land and lead them into the battles of conquest. And he says to him, "Fear them not, for the Lord your God, he shall fight for you." And this is basically the whole content of this parsha. Now, this parsha, Sedra Devarim, is always read on Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. The book of Lamentations is all about the improper speech in need for correction, which we read it on Tisha B'Av, the saddest part of the year in Jewish calendar. But it does not mean total obedience like in Christianity, or submission, which is actually a direct translation of the word Islam. For a region which contains 613 commandments, that's what Judaism contains, there is no Hebrew word that means obedience. The closest equivalent to the word obedience is Shema. Shema, which means listening or hearing or trying to understand. Very important aspect of Judaism is the fact that it's a religion not of individuals, but of all people. Faith does not belong to the private corners of one's soul. It belongs to the life we live together. Where people meet is where God is to be found. That's what Rabbi Sachs says, and I'm sure he's quoting one of our sages. So deep does this idea go that the word for human life in Judaism, Chaim, my name, Chaim, is actually plural. It's not singular. As if life alone were not alive. The word Simcha in Hebrew is impossible to translate precisely because it does not mean happiness, joy, rejoicing, because each of these emotional states can be experienced alone. Someone at home. However, whereas Simcha in Judaism always refers to a collective celebration. Simcha means the happiness we share with others together. Just keep that thought regarding the collective happiness of Simcha in your mind for the next few minutes. It's very important in order for you to understand what I'm trying to say. There is no doubts in my mind, and as well as many sages which I listened to and many shiurim which I listened to over the last few weeks, which basically say that we are right now in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic experience a plague of biblical proportions. Probably it will go down in the history and our future generations will talk about it for many years to come. So let's try to understand why we have this pandemic and what are the reasons for it. Because nothing happens on this planet without spiritual world influence and or decisions made up there. In order to understand this, let's make a few basic assumptions like axioms in mathematics. First one. The world prior to COVID-19 was not what Moses instructs us and Israel to build as the future civilization built on Torah law. Based on the law, on the principle, love thy friend as yourself. We did not have this kind of civilization right here on earth prior to COVID-19. That's a fact. 2. Hashem, as the loving father of his creation, human beings, all human beings, is not entirely happy as a result with this earthly state of affairs, looking from all aspects of life. And please let's agree on the following, that COVID-19 is not a punishment at all. It's just a lesson of a loving father to his children. We Jews, as a nation of the priests, which is supposed to be an example for the rest of humanity, are very far from it. We are divided as ever, and some of us misbehave badly, and I can mention quite a number of names, but there is no need. Some of them are, sexual perverts and die in prison, and the others multi-billionaires financing riots and looting, using power of their billions, and openly calling themselves a Jewish anti-Semite, because this is what it says in Wikipedia about the person and his parents. More than that, we are not serving him, Hashem, in happiness, as instructed. I was talking about it a few minutes ago. But we are because we are totally divided between all the branches of Judaism. This is one of the reasons why he took away the Simcha and locked us all up, away from our synagogues, at home, away from our communities, whatever they are. Families 4, axiom 4, families were falling apart. Divorce rates were skyrocketing. Axiom 5, problem 5, a huge proportion of young generation succumbed to drugs, addictions, depression, inability to plan for their future. This resulting in huge youth unemployment on one hand, and a huge shortage of skilled workforce on the other hand. Last but not least, 6, the global climate change is upon us. I am not sure we humans are 100% responsible for it. There could be other natural reasons, but there are no doubts that our overproduction of useless products for the sake of profits, generation of millions of tons of rubbish and plastics is definitely contributing to it. No question about that. There are many more reasons why God would not be happy with our civilization. So he sent us this tiny little virus. You hardly can see it even with a powerful microscope. It looks like COVID-19 is actually trying to address the problems I just mentioned and much more. Please do not misunderstand me. Thousands of people are dying around the world. And it is a huge tragedy for every family who lost any family members or friends or close acquaintances. But if we listen to the logic and try to control our negative emotions for a few minutes, we may see another side of COVID-19, the pandemic. Prior to COVID-19, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Euronews, and you name it, all the other news channels were talking about what? Iran and North Korea preparing nuclear weapons for the future war and annihilation of Israel. Or maybe North Korea in case of Europe or America or South Korea. News were talking about Israel's aggression against Palestinians, Brexit issues, China's expansion in South China Sea, all wars in the Middle East, including Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Mexican drug wars in South America, you name it. Now, with COVID-19 arrival, all of them, 90% of the time, talking about COVID-19. Isn't that amazing? Why? Because this is the main global problem, which does not have any borders and does not differentiate between rich, poor, powerful or powerless. Half of Iranian government is sick with COVID-19, so their priorities regarding nuclear weapons obviously have changed quite dramatically. There was no other way. The United Nations called the end of all wars in the face of COVID-19 as the world confronts a common enemy. It's time to put armed conflict on lockdown, stated the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is actually issued so many negative statements regarding Israel. Interesting, isn't it? Palestinian-Israeli cooperation to combat COVID-19 is established and they are working together. Not without problems, but they are working together. COVID-19 demonstrated to all governments around the world how dependent their countries are on Chinese manufacturing goods, affecting even vital aspects of life and death. Finally, politicians realize the mistakes they've made over the last 20, 30 years, that they must take back control over the supply of critical, medical, strategic, medical, military and food-related products in order to guarantee safety of their own population. What has happened with the destruction of manufacturing sector in the Western countries is a crazy scenario of a human taking his own heart and giving it to a stranger to manage. That's what Western governments around the world did. Gave the whole manufacturing sector to China, India, Malaysia, whoever else to manage, forgetting that a serious share of all of those items are critical for their existence. On the flip side of the coin, the garbage plastic goods which have flooded the world markets from China, Malaysia and India, etc., no longer required. People are, understood that this is all garbage, there are much more important issues. Since people realize they can live without all of this. People suddenly realize there is more to life than the latest gadget or latest fashion. The social distancing and lockdowns have demonstrated to all of us how much we miss our social groups, our churches, synagogues, mosques. We miss our connections with people. I used to go to my synagogue once a week on Saturdays, and sometimes I was maybe a little bit reluctant to go, but most of the time I did go. I went. When I no longer could go there, I missed my rabbi, my friends there, the spiritual elevation one gets when they praying together in a minyan of 10. At the same time, praying alone at home actually helps to slow down and to seek maybe a deeper meaning in your personal prayers. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, we experience now the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. This is on top of the COVID-19. And sometimes riots and looting, particularly in the United States. We experience all sorts of anti-government demonstrations in many countries. Again, God is teaching us that equality and proper distribution of wealth are still very serious, outstanding issues. However, rule of law must prevail, and riots and looting is not the way to go. It's not the solution. The social distancing limitations have uncovered many other issues which were hidden. Nobody knew about them. For example, the other day I saw on Euronews The seasonal fruits and vegetables pickers in Spain and France and Italy and many other countries, probably in Australia too, work and live in terrible conditions. They are abused and deprived of basic liberties. The exploitation, underpayment are similar to slavery. And this is now in the 21st century. So because of the social distancing limitations, they suddenly went to the surface and became an issue where the news channels talking about it. These people are even underpaid, well below minimum wages. And they are a critical aspect of supply of food for you and me and everybody else. The lockdowns have forced families to spend more time together. This resulted in many new frictions between family members sometimes. And at the same time, many couples, which used to be on the brink of a divorce, suddenly found again, rekindled their life, their love, and found solutions, and maybe enjoyed their time together much more. Some parents discovered during the home studies with their kids that their kid is not so bad actually, and maybe a smart kid, contrary to what some of the teachers in his school are saying. Neighbors helping the elderly people, singing from their balconies and dancing in front of their houses just to generate some sort of a connection with other people. Zoom and Facebook are used to connect people despite the social distancing and lockdown requirements. We learned new ways to connect as a result of all of this. Governments around the world woke up to the youth problems and now establishing new educational and vocational training programs trying to address all sorts of issues related to youth unemployment, drug addiction, etc. Biological and medical laboratories, which always used to compete with each other, now cooperating in the work of developing vaccine against the COVID-19 virus. Last but not least, during COVID-19 lockdowns, when city streets were empty, in many parts of the world, the air got much cleaner, and even the wild animals started to appear on the streets. Like, for instance, mountain goats went to the streets of Llandudno in Wales, or jackals appeared in the Herakon Park in Tel Aviv in Israel, or raccoons walking the Central Park in New York in the broad daylight. Deers were seen crossing the pedestrian crossing in Japan, in Nara. Hashem is showing all humanity that what we humans need to do. A lot of work to build a world where one person cares for the others, who provides an essential service, like fruit picker, or any shopping shelf products loading worker, or a nurse, or a doctor, or a chemist, a teacher, and that they are much more important to us than the movie stars or sports stars. May Hashem help all of us and guide us like a loving father to the new post-COVID-19 normal world. Shabbat Shalom.